morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of the corporate tower, reflecting off the polished marble floors in the grand lobby. Employees in crisp suits rushed past, clutching coffee cups and folders, their heels and shoes clicking, like an orchestra of ambition. Amid this steady stream of well-dressed professionals, a young woman stepped through the revolving doors. Her attire was clean but modest. A plain cream blouse tucked neatly into a long skirt and a faded leather satchel slung over her shoulder. She didn't look like the others. No designer handbag, no sharp-pressed blazer, no air of hurried self-importance. Her name was Sarah Whitmore, though most people in her hometown simply called her Eli Whitmore's girl. Her father was a farmer, well respected in the rural community for his hard work and integrity. She had grown up surrounded by golden wheat fields, muddy boots, and the steady rhythm of early mornings and long days. And now, here she was, in the gleaming heart of the city, about to face the CEO of Rexford Industries, one of the largest agricultural corporations in the country. The receptionist, a young man in a navy blue tie, looked up as Sarah approached the desk. "Name?" he asked politely. "Sarah Whitmore," she replied, her voice steady though her stomach was tight, with nerves. He typed something quickly into his computer. "You're here for the management trainee interview?" "Yes." He gave her a quick glance, perhaps noticing that she didn't match the typical image of someone applying for such a position. Still, he smiled faintly and gestured toward the elevators. "Top floor. Mr. Rexford will see you in conference room 3. Sarah thanked him and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Brown hair neatly tied back, no makeup except for a touch of lip balm, and a determined set to her jaw. The elevator chimed and opened to a hushed hallway carpeted in deep gray. Framed photographs lined the walls, images of sprawling factories, glossy machinery, and fields of crops that stretched toward the horizon. Sarah studied them as she walked, her mind drifting briefly to the reality behind those pictures. The smell of freshly turned soil, the sting of calloused hands after hours of labor, the exhaustion that came when machinery broke and the day's work was doubled. She reached conference room 3. The door was already open, and inside sat Edward Rexford, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her father's yearly equipment budget. His hair was silver at the temples, his cufflinks glinted under the ceiling lights, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, barely flicked up from the papers in front of him as she entered. "Miss Whitmore," he said, not looking up fully. His tone was polite but clipped, like he had already decided the outcome of this meeting. "Yes, sir." She stepped forward and offered her hand. He shook it briefly, then gestured toward a chair opposite his large oak desk. "Please sit." Sarah sat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. For a long moment, he scanned the top page in his folder. "You're applying for a position in our management trainee program," he began, his voice even. "I see you graduated from the State University with a degree in business administration, but no prior corporate experience." "That's correct," she replied. He looked up at her now, one eyebrow raised. "So why should I hire someone without a proven track record in business, especially in a competitive program like ours?" Sarah took a breath, feeling the weight of his skepticism. "I believe I have valuable experience, sir, just not in the way you might expect." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smirk. "Do tell." She met his gaze steadily. "I grew up on a farm. I've managed supply issues, negotiated sales, handled unpredictable weather patterns, and kept operations running when resources were scarce. I may not have worked in an office, but I've learned how to solve problems without wasting time or money." The CEO leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "That's admirable," he said slowly. though his tone carried the faintest trace of condescension. But business at this level is different from running a small family farm. We deal with millions in revenue, complex contracts, competitive markets. Sarah didn't flinch. And yet the principles are the same: efficiency, adaptability, strategy. My father always said, if you can make a farm thrive, you can make anything thrive. Edward Rexford studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled faintly, though not in a warm way. Miss Whitmore, people in my position tend to look for candidates who fit the mold. Business school graduates with internships at well-known firms. People who already understand the corporate culture. You, on the other hand, seem, he searched for the word, out of place. She let the words hang for a moment, then replied quietly, maybe that's exactly what your company needs. Someone who's not stuck inside the mold. There was a pause. Somewhere down the hall, Sarah could hear the faint clicking of keyboards and the muffled ring of a phone. Edward's gaze hardened slightly, as though he were assessing whether this young woman was merely stubborn or truly capable. You're confident, he said finally. I'm prepared, she corrected. There's a difference. For the first time, the CEO seemed to register that this was not going to be the usual kind of interview, where the candidate nervously agrees with everything and tries to impress with buzzwords. This young woman was speaking from real experience, not from a textbook. He closed the folder in front of him and steepled his fingers. Very well, Miss Whitmore. Let's see what you're really made of. Edward Rexford leaned back in his leather chair, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he studied Sarah. The interview had already taken a turn he hadn't expected. Most candidates stammered, nodded too much, or listed off their credentials, like they were reciting a grocery list. This one, a farmer's daughter in a modest blouse, was sitting here as though she'd been negotiating her whole life. He tapped the desk lightly with a fingertip. All right, Miss Whitmore, let's put this confidence of yours to the test. He slid a sheet of paper toward her. On it was a printed table of numbers, costs, sales figures, and a sudden drop in profits over a 3-month period. This, he said, is a real case from one of our smaller divisions. Profits down by 30% in a single quarter. Imagine you've just been promoted to oversee this department. You have 30 days to reverse the trend. What do you do? Sarah studied the paper for a moment. Her eyes moved across the columns. Costs climbing, supply delays, and a note about a major piece of equipment being out of commission for repairs. She felt her shoulders relax. She'd seen problems like this before. Only the numbers were smaller. And instead of a high-tech factory, it had been her father's grain harvester. She looked up at him. First, I'd stop the bleeding before trying to grow anything new, she said. He tilted his head. Meaning? Meaning I'd look for the biggest, fastest fix to stabilize the situation. The equipment repair is the bottleneck. Without it, production drops. I'd bring in a temporary backup or rent equipment to keep production flowing, even if it's slightly less efficient. That buys time. Rexford crossed his arms. And the costs? I'd renegotiate short-term supplier contracts. Lock in a temporary bulk discount to offset the rental cost. Then, I'd rally the staff. Productivity drops when morale drops, and morale drops when they think management doesn't care. I'd make it clear their work matters, and back it up by being present on the floor. Her voice was steady, not rushed. She wasn't guessing, she was remembering. When you're on a farm, she continued, you can't afford to wait for the perfect solution. If a storm's coming, you fix the fence with whatever you've got, and you do it fast, or you lose everything. For the first time, Rexford's smirk softened into something closer to interest. All right, he said. But say you've done all that, and after 30 days profits are still low. What then? Then I'd stop treating the symptoms and address the disease. Look at why the equipment failed in the first place. Poor maintenance? Overuse? Wrong type for the job? I'd also review the entire supply chain. See where waste is happening. You can't grow a healthy field if there's a leak in the irrigation. Rexford leaned forward slightly. You talk like someone who's led a team before. I have, she said simply. It just didn't happen in an office. But people are people, whether they wear overalls or suits. They work harder for someone who works alongside them, not just above them. The room went quiet again. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, an assistant passed by carrying a stack of files. Somewhere down the hall, a printer hummed to life. Finally, Rexford broke the silence. You know, Miss Whitmore, you remind me of my first year running this company. Back then, I had nothing but a second-hand desk and a small loan. I made do with what I had until I didn't have to anymore. But you, he eyed her thoughtfully. You still think like someone who has to fight for every inch. I do, she admitted. And I think your company's gotten comfortable. Comfort is dangerous. It makes you slow to react, slow to innovate. That's when competitors catch up. A faint, almost amused glint appeared in his eyes. You're accusing my company of being complacent? I'm saying it could happen, if you're not careful. Rexford chuckled, not dismissively this time, but like a man who recognized a boldness he hadn't seen in a long while. You realize most people in your position wouldn't dare talk to me like that. I'm not most people, Sarah said quietly. Another pause stretched between them, thick with unspoken calculations. Rexford was weighing her words, testing her in his mind. Then, almost abruptly, he shifted gears. Tell me, he said, why do you really want this job? Don't give me the standard line about opportunity or career growth. Tell me the truth. Sarah didn't hesitate. Because I understand the business you're in. More than the numbers, more than the marketing. I know the people who work the land. I know what it takes to produce the raw materials your entire company depends on. I can be the bridge between the people in your boardroom and the people in the fields. And because I'm not here just to collect a paycheck, I'm here to make sure the work actually means something. Her voice had a quiet conviction, the kind that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Rexford studied her again, but this time his eyes were different. Less like a judge evaluating a case and more like a craftsman inspecting a rare piece of wood, wondering what it could become. You know, he said slowly, most people walk in here trying to impress me with their resume. You've barely mentioned yours. That's because a resume is just words on paper, Sarah replied. I'd rather show you what I can do. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if filing away a decision he wasn't ready to reveal yet. Very well, he said. One last question for today. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his gaze fixed on hers. What makes you think you can handle the pressure here? This isn't the kind of place where people have the luxury of making mistakes. One wrong move, and careers end. Sarah didn't blink. Because where I come from, one wrong move can mean the difference between feeding your family and going hungry. I've handled pressure my whole life, and I don't crack. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Then Rexford leaned back, a slow smile forming on his face. You're not like the others. Miss Whitmore, he said at last. Not at all. Sarah gave a small, polite smile. I take that as a compliment. He chuckled. You should. I don't give them often. But in the back of her mind, Sarah could feel something shifting. The tone in the room had changed. The balance of power wasn't exactly even yet, but the distance between them had closed. And though Rexford didn't know it, she had one more card to play, one that would change the entire conversation. That card, however, could wait until the right moment. Edward Rexford closed the folder in front of him and tapped it twice, as if sealing the conversation. Well, Miss Whitmore, he said, you've certainly been memorable. I can't say I expected a farmer's daughter to walk in here and give me a lecture on complacency. Sarah smiled faintly. I wasn't lecturing. I was being honest. Same thing, he replied dryly, though there was a trace of humor now. Still, you've made your point. I'll have my assistant be in touch after I've reviewed the rest of the candidates. Sarah knew the polite dismissal when she heard it. This was the moment most people would stand, thank him for his time, and walk out hoping for a call that would never come. But Sarah had been raised on a farm, and farmers knew something city people often forgot. You never leave the field before the work is truly done. She didn't move. Instead, she looked him straight in the eye. There's something I think you should know before you decide. Rexford raised an eyebrow. Oh? Yes, she said, her voice even but carrying a quiet weight. Do you remember the land your first factory was built on, out in Fairfield County 25 years ago? He leaned back in his chair, surprised by the change in direction. Of course I do. That was one of the first major steps for the company. Why? That land, Sarah said, belonged to my father. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Rexford blinked once, slowly. Your father was Eli Whitmore? Yes. For a moment, his polished executive mask slipped. The name clearly meant something to him. He glanced away as if replaying old memories in his mind. I remember him, he said at last. Tough negotiator. Wouldn't sell unless we agreed to certain terms. I respected that. Sarah's gaze didn't waver. He sold you that land because he believed your company would bring jobs to our community. And you did, for a while. But over the years, I've watched as those jobs moved elsewhere, piece by piece, until what's left in Fairfield County is just a shuttered building and people struggling to make ends meet. The CEO's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. My father never complained, Sarah went on. He always said business changes and you can't hold grudges against the tide. But I saw what happened, and I decided that if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure companies like yours didn't forget the people they started with. Rexford was silent, his fingers steepled under his chin. The room felt heavier now, as if the air itself understood the weight of what she was saying. You're telling me, he said slowly, that this interview isn't just about you wanting a job. It's about, what, holding me accountable? It's about making sure that if I work here, I'm not just another voice saying what you want to hear, Sarah replied. It's about being the person in the room who reminds you that numbers on a spreadsheet are connected to real people. People like my father. People like the workers you've never met, but whose lives depend on the decisions made in this building. Rexford studied her for a long moment, his sharp gaze searching her face for any sign of bluff. But there was none. You know, he said finally, most candidates would never dare bring up something like this. They'd smile, nod, and try to fit in. I'm not most candidates, Sarah said again. He gave a short, almost grudging laugh. No, you're not. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Outside, the late morning sun cast long beams of light across the floor, slicing the conference room into bright gold and shadow. Finally, Rexford stood, smoothing the front of his suit. Miss Whitmore, let me tell you something about me. I didn't get here by playing nice. I built this company by taking risks, making tough calls, and never letting sentiment get in the way of the bottom line. And yet, he paused, meeting her eyes. I've been looking for someone who isn't afraid to challenge me, someone who can tell me when I'm wrong, and prove it. I think you just did that. Sarah rose from her seat. Does that mean I have the job? It means, he said, you've earned a second meeting with my executive team. If you can convince them half as well as you convinced me, you'll have a place here. She extended her hand, and this time, when he shook it, there was no condescension in his grip, only respect. As she left the conference room, she felt the weight of what had just happened. She hadn't just survived an interview with Edward Rexford, she had changed its course entirely. Down in the lobby, the receptionist glanced up from his desk. "How'd it go?" he asked. Sarah allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Let's just say it went differently than he expected. When she stepped back out into the bright city sunlight, she felt the same breeze she used to feel on the farm before a storm, charged, alive, full of possibility. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain: she hadn't come all this way just to play it safe. Somewhere high above, in the corner office of Rexford Industries, Edward Rexford stood at the window watching her walk away. He had met hundreds of candidates in his career, but something about this one, the farmer's daughter with the unshakable gaze, stayed with him. And for the first time in a long time, the great Edward Rexford found himself wondering if, maybe, just maybe, his company needed her more than she needed it.